Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us again. Tonight we're going to make spaghetti sauce, and it's not going to be thick or even thicker. It's going to be the thickest spaghetti sauce you've ever had. Here are the ingredients. You can pause and write them down. And hey, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Fred and I really appreciate it. Well, here are 2 quarts of my home canned tomatoes. People often ask for a great spaghetti sauce to can, and I always say can your tomatoes and make your sauce later. And I'll show you why as we go along. It really is different. It's a different flavor, and this is how I do it. First, I want you to hear the sound of a properly sealed jar. So I drained off most of the juice, and I've put this in a blender cup. I'm going to add some fresh herbs. I'm going to start with some basil. You don't really have to chop it up. This is oregano. All of these are from my herb garden. And you know, this has a different flavor done this way than it does if you make the sauce and can it. Here's my rosemary. Because canning can do strange things to herbs. It can intensify or wash them out. When you use them like this, you're going to get more fresh herb flavor. I'm adding 2 or 3 cloves of garlic depending on the size. So anyway, the flavor you get from cooking the herbs fresh in the tomatoes as opposed to cooking down sauce is really different. I have a couple of little shallots here from my garden. They won't make a lot of difference in the flavor, but I like them. I'm going to throw them in here. And you know, there's nothing wrong with canning spaghetti sauce. I sometimes can spaghetti sauce, but in my opinion, this is just better. Now I'm going to hit this with my handy dandy immersion blender, and you can do this in a regular blender or a food processor. It's just easier for me to do it this way, and I'm going to give it a really good blend. I don't want any chunks. So, you know, minute and a half, just until it's smooth. Now to the meat. I'm using some lean ground beef. You can use half and half with sausage. This is pretty lean. That's mostly liquid. It's not fat, and we're going to cook that off. Spread it out so you can brown it. You've probably heard me say before, browning meat is important because it brings flavor. So you see most of that is cooking off. I've got a good sizzle going here. You can see the liquid is cooked off. Now if you have fat here, you can drain it off. You don't want to leave a lot of fat in the pan. But this was nice lean grass-fed beef. So sliced mushrooms. Now I'm leaving my veggies in great big chunks. You can cut them smaller if you like. We just like the big chunks. And my measurements are not precise here. This is about 1.5 cups of mushrooms. Use what you like. And this is another reason for making your spaghetti sauce with canned tomatoes instead of making spaghetti sauce and canning it. You get these nice big chunks of veggies, and they're going to still taste fresh. About the same amount of onions, and you can see I've got a big chop on these too. They're all going to soften up, and the flavors are going to blend. Whoops. Let me separate that. And the flavors are going to stay fresh tasting. Folks often ask for a recipe for garden fresh. This is it. And I'm giving a generous sprinkle of salt here because that helps the veggies weep and let go their flavor. I'll salt later and pepper. This is just to help the veggies let go their flavor. And we want to get a pretty good simmer going here. And I'm going to add my peppers last, which is really just kind of a thing with me. I like my peppers to stay a little bit crisper. And I'm using a mixture of red and green bell pepper. You can use any peppers you like. So I add about 1/2 cup of beef broth. This is optional. What it does is help smooth out the acid in the tomatoes. So we're going to cover this, let it simmer for about 15 or 20 minutes, just long enough to soften up the veggies a bit. So here we are. The veggies are still in big chunks, but they've softened up quite a bit. And we've got a good bit of cooking left to do. So I just wanted them to sweat and let the flavors all meld. And the liquid that's in this pan now is the beef broth and the vegetable juices. And they're going to bring some great flavor. So time to add our sauce. And you know, I do this all the time. I really should have used a bigger pan. Every time I say I'm going to use the Dutch oven, and then I use my skillet. But we'll be okay. It won't overflow, but it'll be close, and I'll have to clean my stove. So I'm adding the other quart of tomatoes, and I've drained them also. I can my tomatoes in hot pack crushed, and there's a good bit of juice that I drained off. But we're just going to stir all this in carefully because my pan wasn't big enough. And then we're going to let this simmer on a low simmer for about an hour. What we're doing is cooking off some of the excess liquid. And yes, that's why I sometimes also can tomato sauce, is because I don't always have this 2 hours. Let's give it a taste. Now's the time for salt and pepper. I don't salt my tomatoes when I can them, so it's real important to check and add. If you salt yours, you'll need less. And I'm going to add a couple of pats of butter. And yes, this is important. This is another method of cutting the acid in the tomatoes. And that's not important to everybody. If you want to leave it out, you can, but you ought to try it at least once because it adds a really mellow, mild taste to the sauce that you don't get without it. And you want to add it toward the end of the hour simmer. Let's plate this up and I'll show you what we got. So here's our pasta, drained, not rinsed. Important, don't rinse it. And we're going to cover this with the sauce. And you see the thickness. One reason we don't rinse the pasta is so the sauce will stick to it. This sauce is going to stick to it anyway. But really, you just shouldn't wash your pasta. No rinsing with cold water. I'm going to just pile this on because we really like the sauce. And then a healthy sprinkle of freshly grated Parmesan. Please don't put the box stuff on this wonderful sauce. Take the time, grate some fresh Parmesan. And now for the best part. We're going to taste this. And I mix it around a little bit. I want to spread that sauce out. And, you know, spaghetti is a comfort food for me. I really have to count my carbs. But I'll spend my carbs on some spaghetti if it has a wonderful sauce to go on it. And this is a wonderful sauce. It's just full of that fresh summer taste of fresh tomatoes grown out in our garden. And I really, really hope you'll try this once. You don't have to cook it this thick if you don't want to. You can stop at the 45-minute point, but I like it thick. I want it to stand up on this spoon. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. I hope to see you again tomorrow.